Hey dear restless mind, tonight, imagine yourself stepping out onto a frozen clearing, where the air nips at your cheeks and the moon paints everything silver blue. Your breath hangs heavy, drifting away in the stillness, while snow crunches beneath your boots. Around you, a few pine branches sway lazily, as if they too are conserving energy for the long night ahead. In the distance, a faint glow flickers, firelight peeking from the seams of a hide-wrapped shelter, promising warmth inside while the world outside would prefer to chew on your toes like a midnight snack. You'd probably never make it through a single medieval night, but don't worry, I'll guide you safely through. So, before we go any further, if this quiet company helps, you can gently tap like and subscribe, but only if it feels right to your heart. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Maybe lying awake in New York or drifting in a quiet room in London. Drop your time and place below, so none of us feel alone tonight. Now dim the lights, let your shoulders relax, and let's begin tonight's slow, strange journey, together, here on Timeless Sleep. You step closer to that tent-like structure, and suddenly you're aware the difference between life and death here starts not with a fire or a blanket, but with geography itself. Long before someone argued about thermostat settings or passive-aggressively turned off the central heating, native families knew that survival began with the campsite. They did not pitch a tipi wherever it looked cute. No, they hunted for terrain that could save their bones. A cliff face might look like just another chunk of frozen rock to you, but in their eyes, it was a wall that broke the wind. Like a natural medieval security guard who doesn't even need to be tipped at Christmas. Imagine trudging across a wide, flat prairie in January. The wind screams like a teenager denied Wi-Fi. You'd last maybe 20 minutes before frost nibbled through every seam of your clothing. But if you shuffle into a small hollow where the land dips, the gale suddenly loses its teeth. Native scouts knew these little cradles of earth, where tall grasses or brush softened the bite of winter air. In other words, the original cozy nook came with no marshmallows required. Water was another decisive factor. You needed it for cooking, cleaning, and surviving, but you didn't want to sleep too close. A frozen river might look picturesque, like a postcard that wants to kill you, but camping beside it meant dealing with fog, slippery surfaces, and the occasional rogue ice sheet pretending to be a sled. The trick was proximity without hazard, close enough to fetch water without losing your toes to frostbite on the commute. Now, about wood. No matter how skilled your fire-making, you can't burn air. Families scouted campsites with fuel in mind, hunting for groves of trees that offered fallen branches and standing dead wood. Pine crackled too fast, oak smouldered too heavy, and cottonwood was like inviting smoke to dinner, but forgetting to serve food. They learned to mix their fuels, quick-burning twigs for starting, dense logs for long sleep. This was not haphazard work. It was a survival science. Think of it like a prehistoric version of stocking your Netflix queue. You want variety so you don't get bored halfway through. And then comes the question of predators and neighbours. Coyotes, wolves and bears weren't politely announcing their arrivals. Picking a campsite wasn't only about warmth, it was about sleeping without becoming someone else's midnight snack. High ground offered visibility, but low hollows gave wind protection. Balance was everything. Too exposed and you're a buffet, too sheltered and you're suffocated by damp cold. This was the tightrope of winter survival, and native communities walked it like expert trapeze artists, except their net was non-existent. Sometimes they even built snow barriers. You might think of snow as the enemy, that frozen betrayal falling from the sky. But packed tightly, snow walls turned into insulators, the same thing that chills you can, paradoxically, keep you warm, like an ex who unexpectedly picks up the dinner bill. A semicircle of snowbank around a tipi acted as a low fence, blocking the draft and amplifying the warmth within. These weren't accidental hacks. They were centuries-tested blueprints of survival. Picture it. A family arriving at dusk. The air smells sharp, like pine and iron. The children are carrying bundles of brush. The parents are scanning the horizon, and everyone has one shared thought. Where do we plant home tonight? They pause in a clearing shielded by tall spruces, their tops swaying like wise elders. Behind them, a ridge shields half the sky. Ahead, a frozen creek waits at a polite distance. The decision isn't poetic, it's strategic. They have just chosen warmth over frost, safety over exposure, and sleep over shivering. Once the site is chosen, the work begins fast. Poles are raised, hides stretched, stakes driven into frost-hardened earth. There's no IKEA manual, but there's a rhythm honed through generations. Each pole angled just so, each seam overlapped like clasped hands. The tipi isn't just a home, it's a collaboration between geometry and nature. Its cone shape doesn't merely look aesthetic on postcards, it slices wind off its edges, making gales glance away rather than barrel through. Aerodynamics before airplanes? Meanwhile, the ground gets attention too. Bare dirt in winter is like sleeping on an ice cube tray. So families scattered spruce boughs, grasses and hides, layering the earth until it felt less like death's waiting room and more like a rough mattress. This wasn't luxury, but it was insulation. Heat doesn't rise out of nothing. It rises out of what you don't lose. And yes, cliffs. Let's go back to those imagined huddling at the foot of a sandstone wall. It holds heat from the day, radiating it back like a prehistoric space heater. Not much. Don't expect spa vibes, but enough to tilt the balance. When you're battling -40 winds, a 5-degree edge is the difference between sleeping and becoming a permanent ice sculpture titled Forgot His Scarf. Humour aside, it's staggering to think of the foresight this required. You don't just stumble into survival. Each campsite decision, windbreak here, water there, wood supply nearby, was as deliberate as programming a thermostat. And because nights were long, families didn't gamble. They relied on elders' wisdom, on oral instructions passed down like sacred passwords. Don't camp too close to the river, don't trust the hollow without testing the air, don't burn the green wood unless you enjoy coughing contests. These lessons saved lives over and over. As you picture yourself stepping into that chosen hollow, smell the smoke of the first twigs catching. Feel the glow brushing your cheeks while the wind keens harmlessly against the cliff behind. Outside, the land is brutal, indifferent, sharp as shattered glass. Inside this chosen spot, you feel the edge of survival tilt in your favour. It's not luxury, it's strategy embodied in earth, stone, and sky. And here's a fun thought. While you argue over the good side of the bed, these families debated the good side of the cliff. One offers shelter from the north wind, the other, less smoke in the tipi. Picture siblings squabbling over which hollow feels less murdery tonight. That's your ancient Airbnb review process. But the truth is they rarely chose wrong. They had centuries of practice, of trial, of error learnt the hard way. Each successful winter camp was another bead on the necklace of survival. And by morning, when the fire coals glowed and smoke rose lazily, that hollow, that cliffside, that grove, it had transformed from indifferent wilderness into a fragile temporary home. You duck beneath the hide flap, and the first thing that greets you is not the smell of food or the sight of blankets, it's the fire. At the very centre of the tipi, a shallow pit glows like the beating heart of the whole structure. It isn't a bonfire, it's carefully measured, small enough to avoid torching the walls yet steady enough to radiate warmth in all directions. Think of it as the prehistoric version of central heating, except you don't get a bill in the mail, and the thermostat is literally a stick you poke into the coals. That fire pit wasn't dug at random. It was placed with intention, slightly sunken into the ground, so embers could nestle in a cradle of earth. The depression shielded sparks from hopping away and setting furs ablaze. Nothing kills the cozy mood faster than realizing your blanket has transformed into a flaming ghost costume. Around the pit, stones were often placed not just for structure but for thermal storage. They soaked in the heat, releasing it slowly through the long night. Basically, ancient underfloor heating, except instead of Italian marble tiles, you get whatever rocks your cousin tripped over outside. Now let's talk about smoke. You might imagine sitting in this cone-shaped space as being similar to grilling ribs inside your closet. But no, the engineering here was quietly brilliant. At the top of the tipi, a gap existed. The smoke hole. Not just an accidental rip, but a deliberate vent. 2 hide flaps framed the opening, and these could be adjusted with poles from inside. Tilt them one way and the breeze carried smoke out. Tilt them another, and the draft sealed tighter, keeping warmth inside. It was primitive HVAC, but shockingly effective. You'd swear someone had taken a course in fluid dynamics, except they learned by coughing through centuries until someone finally muttered, "You know, maybe we should make the hole adjustable. And don't forget the cone shape itself. Heat rises, right?" Well, inside a tipi, It didn't just whoosh away into the void, it swirled. The sloped walls directed the rising warmth back downward, creating a convection pattern that spread the heat around. In modern terms, it was the difference between sitting by a fireplace that only toasts your knees and enjoying an even body-hugging warmth that whispers, "Stay alive another night." The floor around the fire became prime real estate. Families sat closest when awake, spreading out hides and mats like medieval beanbags. At night, people shifted slightly back so embers wouldn't spark their toes but the warmth would still cradle them. Children or elders, those most vulnerable, were given the sweet spots, the little Goldilocks zones where it wasn't too smoky or too drafty. If you ever wondered how family values looked in practical terms, here it is. A toddler bundled next to the fire while their uncle sleeps half in the draft, grumbling but surviving. Of course, fire inside a home has its risks. Accidents did happen. Yet, remarkably, tipi design minimized disasters. The smoke hole let flames breathe, preventing buildup of choking gases. The central placement meant walls were a safe distance away. And hides, though flammable, were treated with fat and smoke, which acted as crude fire retardants. Think of it as nature's version of a fireproofing spray, except applied while tanning your buffalo hide. Let's pause and appreciate the sheer cleverness. You're living in sub-zero cold, without electricity, without fiberglass insulation, without even the option to order a space heater online. And yet, you've built a system where a small, efficient fire can heat a whole family space, ventilate itself, and cook dinner. That's multitasking on a level that makes your modern open-concept kitchen look like a rookie mistake. Speaking of dinner, that central pit, doubled as the stove, a tripod of sticks could be erected over it, suspending pots or meat. Imagine the smell: venison stew bubbling, fat sizzling, steam mixing with smoke. You're both nourished and warmed by the same hearth, and when the pot's empty, the stones retain their warmth, glowing faintly like coals that refuse to let you forget they're still useful. Efficiency was everything. No resource went wasted. Now, picture lying on your side near the fire, half asleep. You hear the quiet crackle, the sigh of flames shifting as a parent leans forward to toss on another log. That simple rhythm, the maintenance of a fire through the night, was life itself. Someone always woke, nudged by instinct or responsibility to feed the flames. It wasn't optional. The fire went out, the cold crept in, and the whole family shivered awake. That's teamwork. Not the corporate kind where you write awkward icebreakers, but the kind where forgetting your chore means frostbite for grandma. The positioning of the fire pit also created zones of living space. Closest to the fire, cooking, warmth, vulnerability. Mid-ring, sleeping, comfort, family chatter. Outer ring, storage, tools and items less sensitive to drafts. The teepee wasn't random. It was divided like a well-designed studio apartment, with a fireplace that also happened to keep the wolves from getting ideas. And let's sprinkle in one odd tidbit. Sometimes people use dung, yes, buffalo dung, as fuel. Before you gag, know this. Dried dung burns steadily, with less smoke than green wood. It was the slow-burn log of the plains. Imagine explaining that to your modern roommate. Don't worry, the smell disappears after it's lit. Translation: you're not getting a second date, but at least you won't freeze to death. Beyond survival, the fire became social glue. Stories, songs, ceremonies, everything circled the flames. The warmth was physical, but it was also cultural. You didn't just fight cold with fire, you fought despair. In endless winter nights, people needed more than survival. They needed connection. So the central fire was also a central stage. Someone telling a funny story was as important as someone stoking the coals, because laughter warmed the spirit while embers warmed the body. And yes, if you've ever laughed so hard your ribs hurt, you know it produces heat. Call it the original dual-fuel heating system. Even the fire's light played a role. Shadows danced on the hides, flickering shapes that turned into impromptu entertainment. Kids squinted, seeing animals or spirits, while elders nodded sagely as if to say, "Yes, that shadow definitely looks like a bison. Now please go to sleep." It was prehistoric Netflix, limited programming, always live, but endlessly imaginative. Think about how you complain when the smoke from your candle sets off a fire alarm. Now compare that to entire families living every night with a smoky hearth, eyes stinging, lungs learning to tolerate. They adapted, they endured, and they still managed to sit around swapping jokes. One could argue that this smoke-hardened resilience built communities as much as the fire itself. So when you picture native families sleeping through frozen nights in their tipis, don't imagine icy silence. Imagine a living, glowing core in the centre of the room, embers whispering, smoke curling, warmth pulsing outward. Picture a baby gurgling near the warm zone, a father adjusting the smoke flap with a practiced poke, a grandmother humming softly while tossing another stick into the pit. That little circle of light was their shield, their stove, their comforter, and their storyteller, all in one. And maybe, just maybe, it makes you wonder, if your entire survival depended on one small glowing circle of coals, how carefully would you tend it? How differently would you view your own living room heater, humming away without your attention? In this quiet, smoke-swirled world, heat wasn't a given. It was a nightly victory. You roll onto your side, and as your eyes wander upward, you notice the crown of the tipi, that opening at the very top where the hides part just enough to let the smoke escape. It looks like the tipi is wearing a little hat with flaps you can tilt, and those flaps are far more important than you'd think. Without them, everyone inside would be wheezing like they'd just run a marathon in January with a mouthful of chimney soot. But with them, the tipi breathes, exhaling smoke, inhaling clean air, and keeping the whole family from coughing themselves into a new spiritual plane. The adjustable smoke flaps were a masterstroke of design. 2 triangular pieces of hide were fastened near the peak, and long poles extended downward into the living area so you could tweak the angle without leaving the cosy circle of warmth. If the wind came from the north, you angled them to scoop the draft through, lifting smoke away. If the breeze shifted, so did you, nudging the flaps until the invisible currents lined up like obedient little servants. Imagine trying to sleep while experimenting with airflow, like a part-time meteorologist, except your degree in not choking to death was earned through nightly practice. Of course, smoke had a personality of its own. Sometimes it behaved like a polite guest, rising neatly and sliding out the vent. Other times it swirled around stubbornly, poking at your eyes, making you blink until tears streamed down your cheeks. Children would wave their arms, chasing it as if it were a spirit to be tamed. Adults learned patience. They'd mutter under their breath, toss a different log on the fire, or crack the hide lower down to invite a small draft. That's right. They sometimes let cold air in on purpose, because a little frost creeping over your toes was better than waking up to lungs that felt like smoked sausages. And here's where physics joins the bedtime story. Tipi is a cone, which means warm air rising pulls cooler air along the edges upward too. The smoke hole isn't just a chimney, it's a pressure valve. By adjusting the flaps, families created suction, guiding the airflow. Too wide, and you lost precious heat. Too tight, and you created a hazy chamber that doubled as an impromptu sauna. So each night became a quiet ballet. Flap angles, fire size, log type, all tuned by instinct. Forget smart thermostats. This was true, smart home technology, powered by muscle memory and sheer will to live. And while you're picturing this engineering marvel, let's not forget the irony. The very smoke they battled also worked as an ally. It cured the hides, seasoned the wooden poles, and discouraged bugs. If you've ever been eaten alive by mosquitoes, you'd happily trade a bit of eye sting for bug-free sleep. So yes, smoke was annoying, but it was also the cheapest pest control plan in history. Just imagine a repellent commercial. Guaranteed to work, side effects include blurry vision and permanent odour campfire perfume. Some nights, though, no flap adjustment could help. Storms blew across the plains with winds so fierce they made the flaps slap like impatient hands. In those moments, smoke venting turned into guesswork. Families might crouch lower, blankets pulled over heads, waiting until the storm passed and the air balanced again. It was uncomfortable, but it was also temporary. Better a smoky shelter than an icy grave under open sky. The tipi wasn't perfection, it was compromise, and compromise meant survival. Now, about drafts. That same smoke vent could be friend or foe depending on weather. Heat wanted to rise and leave, and sometimes it nearly succeeded. That's why those flaps mattered so much. They weren't just smoke guides, they were heat guards. Closing them tight on still nights turned the tipi into a slow-breathing cocoon. Open them just right, and you struck balance. Air fresh enough to breathe, but heat lingering long enough for toes to thaw. Families became artists of airflow, their brushstrokes invisible, their canvas made of smoke and breath. And don't think this task was just for adults. Even children learned to handle the poles. Imagine being 6 years old, eyes squinting through haze, nudging a long stick upward to adjust the flap while your mother stirred stew and your father trimmed sinew for tools. No toys, no cartoons, just the evening responsibility of making sure the roof didn't suffocate everyone. It was a household chore on par with take out the trash, except skipping it risked mass unconsciousness. Builds character, right? But there's something magical in the image of that smoke hole at night. Look up, and through the open gap you'd see stars. Pinpricks of light shone directly into the tipi, aligning with the smoke as it drifted away. It was like the fire inside spoke to the heavens above, a dialogue of glowing embers and twinkling constellations. Children would whisper about spirits slipping through that hole carried by smoke watching over them. Adults might quietly agree, though with the kind of practical shrug that said, yes, spirits, but also, let's not let the rain in. Rain, of course, was the enemy of all good fires. If clouds opened, families shifted the flaps into a peaked shield. Water would hit, slide down the hides, and drip harmlessly outside rather than onto the coals. You'd still smell damp hide like a wet dog had joined the sleepover, but at least your fire stayed alive. And remember, in winter, snow behaved better. It slid off the angled walls, piling neatly around the base. That base snow wasn't a nuisance. It acted as extra insulation. Once again, the very element that threatened to freeze you doubled as your ally. Think of the smoke hole as the tipi's personality. Moody, adaptable, unpredictable, but always vital. Without it, life was impossible. With it, life was tolerable, even in moments beautiful. Adjusting those flaps became second nature, a background habit like checking your phone brightness at night. Families hardly thought of it consciously. The pole nudged, the flap moved, the air shifted, and just like that, the balance between choking and breathing, freezing and sweating tilted in your favour. Now picture yourself lying on the ground inside, bundled in furs, the fire pit glowing faintly. Smoke trails upward, curling, sliding through the vent. Above it, Orion blinks down, half hidden by drifting haze. The air feels warmer than it should, considering the ice storm outside. Your chest rises and falls, lungs pulling in smoky air, exhaling warmth back into the little ecosystem. The tipi breathes with you. That smoke hole isn't just a vent, it's a throat, sighing upward into the sky. And here's the kicker. All this was done without blueprints, without science textbooks, without trial runs in a suburban backyard. It was ancestral knowledge, passed like a recipe. How wide to angle, how low to sit, how big to stoke the fire. These were memorized not through diagrams, but through generations of lived nights. Survival wasn't theory, it was bedtime practice. So when you think about native families enduring brutal winters in their tipis, remember this detail. They didn't merely huddle under hides and hope. They engineered airflow, manipulated drafts, and tuned their shelters with the precision of conductors guiding an orchestra. Their symphony wasn't music. It was smoke swirling, fire glowing, stars blinking, lungs sighing. And the conductor's baton was nothing more than a long stick, nudging leather flaps just so. You may argue that your smart home app can dim your lights and adjust your heating from 1,000 miles away. Impressive, yes. But can it make Orion peek into your room while smoke ghosts drift skyward, taking your worries along with them? Somehow, I think not. You roll, over in your nest of hides, and realize the fire's glow is fading. It's not panic. You know this rhythm. Fires are greedy beasts and they need feeding, but they also demand the right diet. Out on the plains, fuel wasn't infinite, and hauling logs wasn't a hobby anyone enjoyed in sub-zero winds. So families became masters of fuel management, treating wood as carefully as gold. Each piece had a purpose, and each spark told a story of judgment calls made long before you lay down to sleep. First, let's talk about types of wood. Greenwood, freshly cut, full of sap, was the worst. Throw that onto your fire and you'd get smoke thicker than a rock concert in the 1970s, but almost no heat. It hissed and spat like an angry cat, mocking your effort to keep warm. So seasoned wood, dead and dried, was the treasure. Cottonwood was common on the plains, soft but reliable. Birch peeled easily, catching flame quickly, perfect for kindling. Hardwoods, when available, burned long and steady, though dragging them back from river valleys was a job that made you consider running away to join a warmer tribe. Then came storage. In summer and fall, families gathered wood not just for immediate use but for winter stockpiles. They stacked it near the camp, sheltered under hides or branches, to keep snow from soaking it. Imagine building a little firewood fort, not for play but for survival. Each log was a night of warmth banked for the future. Skimp in autumn, and you'd curse yourself by February when your pile dwindled to twigs and frozen regrets. Tending the fire was an art. You couldn't just dump a tree trunk into the pit and hope for the best. Fires were layered, tinder at the base, then small sticks, then larger logs to smoulder through the night. The goal was balance, enough heat to push back the cold, but not so much that the hides sweated and dripped with condensation. Yes, too much heat made the teepee damp, like waking up in a tent that's been licked by a giant dog. Cozy? Not really. Night duty meant someone always had one ear open. At intervals, a figure would stir, shuffle quietly and feed the coals. They didn't strike new flames unless desperate. Striking sparks was harder in the cold. Instead, they kept embers alive, banking them under ash, coaxing them back with dry sticks. Think of it as tucking your fire in for a nap and waking it gently instead of blasting it with a trumpet. The fire responded like a moody friend. Treat it well. It glowed faithfully. Neglect it. It sulked into darkness. And here's a quirky tidbit. Buffalo dung, once dried, became an alternate fuel. Collected carefully and stacked neatly, it burned with surprising steadiness. You might wrinkle your nose, but it smelled less offensive than you'd think. Certainly less than burning sap-filled greenwood. Families called it meadow chips, turning something unglamorous into something essential. Talk about recycling. Imagine explaining to your modern self that the warmest night's sleep you'll ever get is powered by a buffalo's digestive leftovers. Sustainability, ancient edition. But wood and dung weren't only about heat. They also shaped the night's mood. Certain woods crackled noisily, sending sparks upward like miniature fireworks. Others burned quietly, with only the occasional sigh. Some coals glowed like tiny stars, perfect for storytelling ambience. Families learned these personalities, choosing their fires like you choose background music. Do you want lively crackle or soothing hum tonight? Children were often tasked with gathering brush and twigs. It was their version of a nightly chore, lighter than dragging logs but still vital. They'd return with arms full of kindling, cheeks red from wind, proudly tossing their contribution onto the pile. Those twigs weren't glamorous, but without them, the bigger logs wouldn't catch. You could say children supplied the spark that kept the whole machine alive. And yes, if they forgot, they'd hear about it from everyone huddled around a smoky, struggling fire. Now imagine this scene. It's midnight. Snow taps softly at the hides, and inside the teepee, a parent rises quietly. They lift a stick, stir the coals, and the fire blushes awake. A few logs are added, carefully angled. Sparks float upward, swirling toward the smoke hole like tiny spirits eager for freedom. The tipi fills with a faint crackle, the kind of sound that wraps you in reassurance. Everyone else snores on, unaware that their survival has just been extended another few hours by one person's sleepy diligence. It's a simple act, almost invisible, but it's the difference between waking in comfort and waking with frost stiffening your breath. And here's the joke hiding inside the seriousness. Every family had at least one person who overfed the fire. They'd toss too much wood, the tipi would heat like a sauna, and soon everyone was peeling off layers, grumbling. Imagine trying to explain, "Yes, I froze you last night, but tonight I've roasted you alive. Consider it balance." Human error, timeless as ever. Even ash played a role. It wasn't discarded lightly. Ash insulated embers, extending their life. And in the morning, families sifted it to reveal glowing hearts still alive beneath. Add tinder, coax gently, and the fire revived without flint or friction. Ash was the fire's blanket, and every camper knew how to tuck it just right. And think of the efficiency. Firewood wasn't just burned, it was portioned, rationed, stretched like a tight budget. Nothing went casually wasted. If a log was half burned, it was set aside to be relit later. Tiny coals were carried carefully in pots to new camps, saving the trouble of striking fresh sparks. That glowing ember in a clay dish was the most precious luggage. Portable warmth, a torch of continuity between places. Imagine trudging miles through snow, protecting a single coal, like it's the VIP passenger of your journey. Lose your ember, and you're back to square one with frozen hands and a prayer. But the system worked. Families didn't just survive, they thrived in rhythm with their fires. They knew when to use fast-burning brush, when to feed the big logs, when to smother flames to conserve fuel. It was a nightly symphony, conducted half asleep but always tuned to perfection. Picture yourself leaning close, watching the embers pulse, listening to the sigh of logs collapsing inward. The tipi feels alive, breathing smoke, glowing warmth, whispering reassurance. Outside, the prairie is a white desert, endless and merciless. Inside, the fire is a heartbeat, steady and strong. And you realize that all the wood gathered, dung collected, coals carried, all of it is not just about warmth. It's about control in a world where so much feels uncontrollable. And maybe that's the lesson for your own life. You can't command the blizzards, but you can tend your fire. You can't halt the wind, but you can angle your logs. In the end, warmth is not a miracle. It's discipline, attention, and a pile of fuel chosen with care. Your eyelids droop as the fire hums its lullaby, but beneath your shoulders the ground presses up with a reminder. This earth is still frozen, and it wants to steal your warmth as greedily as a cat steals unattended roast chicken. Anyone who has ever tried to sleep directly on winter soil knows the result. It drains the heat from you faster than your cousin drains the punch bowl at family gatherings. That's why the people who lived in tipis or tents didn't simply flop onto bare dirt. They built insulation from the ground up, literally, with tricks that made the difference between waking up refreshed or waking up as a human icicle. The first step was clearing. Snow or loose soil might be scraped aside to make a level base, but instead of leaving that base raw, families covered it with layers. Spruce boughs, grasses or reeds were spread thickly, a natural carpet. Picture a child's arms full of pine branches, dropping them in overlapping mats until the ground bristled with green needles. The fragrance alone would almost make you forget you were camping in temperatures that could turn your nose into a brittle ornament. These layers trapped pockets of air, and air is the true secret of insulation. Cold ground couldn't drink warmth straight from your body when a cushion of needles and grass interrupted the theft. On top of this green bedding came hides, buffalo, elk, or deer, depending on availability. Imagine unrolling a massive buffalo robe across the boughs, its heavy weight pressing down, flattening the uneven surface, smoothing the floor into something approximating a mattress. The hair might face upward or downward depending on need. Fur up gave a plush layer, fur down stopped draft sneaking through seams. You think of your fancy memory foam mattress. This was memory. Bison. Firm, reliable, and extremely unlikely to offer a refund. But the layering didn't stop there. More hides or mats could be stacked, turning the tipi floor into a patchwork quilt of textures. Families often had designated sleeping spots, with each person's bedding rolled during the day to make room for cooking and work. At night, the rolls unfurled, and suddenly the dirt floor looked like a well-furnished nest. Children might tumble together onto a shared pile of robes, giggling, and then quickly silenced by parental shushing when the laughter threatened to outcompete the fire's crackle. Let's not ignore elevation. In particularly icy conditions, some families lifted sleeping platforms off the ground entirely. Wooden frames or piles of brush created a raised bed, keeping sleepers away from direct contact with the frozen earth. It wasn't glamorous, no four-poster canopy here, but it did the job. The ground's ambition to suck out your body heat was thwarted, leaving you free to keep your warmth longer. You could say it was the original loft bed, minus the IKEA screws that never quite align. And here's a fascinating quirk. Snow itself, packed carefully, could serve as flooring. Instead of clearing it away completely, families might tamp snow flat, then layer boughs and hides over it. Snow is an insulator. It's the air trapped within its crystals that matters. Walk into an igloo and you'll feel surprisingly comfortable for something made of frozen water. The same principle applied here. It was as if nature whispered, "Yes, I froze you solid, but I'll also pad your bed if you respect me." Daily maintenance of the floor mattered too. Mats were shaken, hides aired out, damp spots cleared before mold set in. Nobody wanted to sleep on bedding that smelled like an unwashed dog. A dry floor was a warm floor, and the discipline of keeping it clean meant the insulation stayed effective. Think of it as housekeeping with life or death stakes. Forget to sweep, you don't just get ants, you get frostbite. And while we're at it, imagine the sensory world of this bedding. The smell of pine needles released under your weight, sharp and soothing. The feel of thick hides, rough at the edges but soft where the fur curled. The occasional crunch of stray grass stalks as you shift in your sleep. It wasn't silence, but it was comfort born of nature's textures. Compare that to your synthetic mattress, smooth and odourless, and you might admit their system, while rustic, had more character. Children sometimes made games of it, building little nests out of extra twigs, pretending to be birds while the adults rolled their eyes. Those same nests might end up being real insulation once the children fell asleep mid-game. Call it multi-purpose parenting. Entertain the kids and pad the bedding simultaneously. But the real brilliance was in how insulation wasn't one size fits all. Each person adjusted their layers. Elders might lie on extra hides, cushioned and lifted higher from the cold. Young, healthy adults might accept leaner bedding, saving the best insulation for the fragile. Babies were wrapped tightly in layers, sometimes even placed in cradle boards lined with moss and fur, the moss absorbing moisture like an ancient diaper. Ingenious, hygienic, and warm. 3 wins in a single bundle. And here's the joke you've been waiting for. Yes, people did sometimes roll over in the night and steal their neighbour's warmth. Not just body heat, but the actual edge of a robe or mat. One sibling hogged the fur, and suddenly the other shivered awake, glaring daggers across the fire. Ancient version of the blanket wars. Fought with elbows and muttered threats, but never truly resolved. Beyond hides and boughs, families also employed clever tricks with heat. Hot stones from the fire, wrapped in hides, were tucked under bedding. They radiated warmth into the floor layers, preventing the cold from creeping upward. You might think of it as a heated mattress pad, except if you misjudged the stone's heat, you ended up leaping up with scorched fur and a story for the ages. Risky? Sure. Effective? Absolutely. Let's not forget airflow. Insulation trapped heat, but it also needed breathing room. Bedding too tight or damp could chill faster. That's why layering was so important. Grasses at the bottom, hides above, fur on top. Each layer did its job, absorb moisture, trap air, block drafts. It was architecture on a microscale, as important as the tipi's overall design. And think of the psychological comfort. Lying down onto hides carried memory, the buffalo's strength, the elk's endurance. People didn't just feel physical warmth, they felt spiritual closeness to the animals whose bodies sheltered them now. Warmth wasn't only about calories of heat, it was about meaning woven into the layers beneath your back. In your modern life, you might obsess over thread counts or mattress firmness. But in the tipi, you measured bedding not by luxury but by survival. Will this layer keep my body heat mine? Will my child wake warm? Will the ground stay a stranger tonight? If the answer was yes, you slept. If not, you adjusted until it was. And perhaps that's the secret comfort, knowing that the ground can try all it wants, but tonight, you've outsmarted it. You'll keep your warmth, and you'll keep your life, cushioned on a floor designed not for beauty, but for endurance. You shift in your bedding, listening to the fire murmur, and notice the heavy weight draped across you. It isn't a quilt or a duvet, it's a buffalo robe, the closest thing to a prehistoric sleeping bag, though sturdier, warmer, and frankly a lot more stylish if you're into that giant beast died for my comfort look. These robes weren't just thrown over like random blankets. They were tools, carefully arranged for maximum warmth. Families knew precisely how to use them to cheat the winter cold, making sure no one woke up as a frozen sculpture worthy of a sad museum exhibit. Let's start with the material itself. Buffalo hides were thick, heavy, and lined with dense fur, the perfect natural insulation. The animal had survived blizzards and prairie winds, so its coat was already engineered for brutal weather. When that hide became your blanket, you basically inherited the buffalo's winter wardrobe. Fur caught warmth, trapping it close to your body, while the thick skin underneath blocked drafts. Compare that to your flimsy fleece throw. Adorable? Yes, but it wouldn't survive 2 minutes against a North Dakota January. Now, the real trick was orientation. fur up or fur down. Each had its own magic. When the fur faced inward toward your body, it created a plush cocoon, soft and snug, like being hugged by a very patient bear. But when fur faced outward, the smooth leather pressed against your clothes, and the fur acted like shingles, shedding moisture, blocking drafts and layering heat for the group. Families alternated orientations depending on the night. One robe fur up, another fur down, stacked like an edible lasagna of warmth. Yes, imagine yourself as the pasta sheet in this wintry casserole, and suddenly survival feels both cozy and slightly ridiculous. And let's talk layering. A single buffalo robe could weigh upward of 40 or 50 pounds. One was warm, two were luxurious, three made you question whether you'd ever escape the bed again. Elders often slept under multiple robes, weighed down so heavily that rolling over became an Olympic event. Picture an old man muttering, "I'm warm, but if I need to pee before dawn, I'm doomed." That's the sacrifice you make when warmth trumps mobility. Children, of course, were bundled together like puppies under shared robes. Parents tucked them in tight, sometimes even sewing hides into sacks for extra protection. Imagine waking up inside what amounts to a buffalo skin burrito. Claustrophobic, maybe, but oh so toasty. Meanwhile, adults spread out slightly more but never too far because sharing robes meant sharing body heat. It wasn't just about the buffalo, it was about the family acting as one collective radiator. Speaking of which, body heat plus buffalo fur was a legendary combination. The hides trapped heat so effectively that, within minutes, the space beneath grew steamy. You might think, steamy? In sub-zero weather? Yes, precisely. People sometimes had to lift the edge to let out excess moisture. Otherwise you woke damp, which was dangerous in the cold. Too much sweat could freeze into frost against the hides. So the game was balance. Keep enough warmth without turning the bedding into a mobile sauna. In modern terms, it was like adjusting the AC while still keeping the blanket because you like the weight. Human nature, timeless as ever. Buffalo robes weren't the only option, of course. Deer, elk and wolf hides also joined the mix, but none matched the sheer thickness of buffalo. Smaller furs became secondary layers, tucked inside or draped over feet. Think of them as the fuzzy socks of the ancient world, adorable, practical, and always stolen by whichever sibling claimed cold feet first. Robes also doubled as daytime gear. During travel, people wore them draped like cloaks, fur out to block snow, leather in to hold body heat. At night, those same robes transformed into blankets. They weren't luxuries, they were multi-tools. The robe you dragged around all day became the cover that saved your life at night. Imagine sleeping under your own winter coat and realizing that, for once, it actually works better than the overpriced gear at your local outdoor store. Maintenance mattered too. Hides had to be smoked, greased and cleaned. A poorly cured hide stiffened, cracking in the cold, becoming about as cozy as sleeping under a frozen pancake. Properly treated hides, however, stayed supple and warm. Families invested real care in this, rubbing them with fat, stretching them over smoky fires. It wasn't just craft, it was survival maintenance. Forget your laundry day. This was hide tending day, and skipping it meant shivering all winter. And of course, robes carried memory. Each hide represented a hunt, a story, a sacrifice. When you pulled one over your shoulders at night, you were literally wrapped in history. The buffalo that fed the family also sheltered it, every rib and sinew contributing to survival. Children learned this instinctively, curling into their robes knowing they were cradled not only by fur but by tradition. Warmth had weight, physical, emotional, spiritual. Picture this. The fire glows low, shadows dance on the walls, and you lie swaddled under a robe so heavy it feels like gravity has taken a personal interest in you. Outside, the wind shrieks, snow lashes against the hides, but inside you're cocooned. The robe smells faintly of smoke and leather, its texture rough yet comforting. Beside you, another sleeper shifts, their warmth brushing against yours. Together, wrapped under shared robes, you form a living, breathing cluster of heat, defying the world's attempt to freeze you solid. Now, imagine the humour woven into this scene. Someone always snored loudly enough to rattle the hides. Someone else complained of a sibling's icy toes. A child inevitably rolled out from under the robe, waking with a squeal that roused the whole tipi, and the robe wars. Oh, the robe wars! Tugging, pulling, silent midnight negotiations over who got more fur. Blanket hogging is not a modern phenomenon. It's as old as humanity itself. Only difference is, back then, it could decide whether you woke comfortably or frostbitten. And here's a delightful oddity. Some robes were painted or decorated, even used ceremonially. Survival and beauty weren't mutually exclusive. Families didn't only think of warmth. They thought of meaning. Symbols on hides reminded them of hunts, victories, or spiritual visions. So when you curled under one, you weren't just borrowing the buffalo's warmth. You were wrapped in the stories of your people, cozy and symbolic all at once. As you picture yourself now, pressed deep beneath one of these hides, consider how different it feels from your own nightly ritual. You flick a switch, your heater hums, your blanket weighs a couple of pounds at best. Here, the robe pins you down like a determined guardian, and the fire is no machine. It's alive, fed and coaxed like a child. You don't sleep with climate control, you sleep with responsibility, and that robe reminds you, with every ounce of its heaviness, that survival is never effortless. And yet, beneath it, you drift. The world may rage outside, but inside the teepee, with buffalo fur against your skin and the fire whispering at your feet, you're warm. Not comfortable in the modern sense, not adjustable, not predictable, but profoundly, deeply warm. You wriggle deeper into the hides, adjusting the robe around your shoulders, and realize that warmth doesn't just come from the fire or the floor beneath you. It also clings to your very skin, layered carefully in clothing that acts like armor against the night. The people who slept in Tipis knew this better than anyone. Your body heat was your most precious possession, and what you wore could either trap it or squander it like coins spilled on the ground. Clothes weren't just decoration. They were heaters stitched from fur, sinew, and wisdom. Start with layers. No one walked into a winter tipi wearing just a single tunic and called it good. Instead, clothes were stacked. A shirt of animal hide, leggings fitted snugly, moccasins stuffed with fur or grass, and outer robes thrown across shoulders. Layering meant flexibility. You could shed a piece if you sweated near the fire, then pile it back on before stepping into the night. They understood something modern adventurers often forget. Sweat is dangerous in the cold. Dampness chills faster than bare skin, and wet clothes become icy traps. So instead of over-bundling, they layered smartly, adjusting like thermostats made of leather ties and bone toggles. Moccasins deserve special attention. Feet are traitors, they lose heat quickly, and frostbite loves toes like a dessert buffet. To prevent this, moccasins were often double-layered, with fur linings turned inward and grasses tucked inside as insulation. Those grasses worked like disposable socks, soaking up moisture and keeping warmth trapped. Imagine the crunch of dried reeds underfoot, shifting with each step, reminding you that even weeds had a place in winter survival. At night, moccasins might be kept on, or at least tucked under robes so they didn't freeze stiff by morning. Nothing ruins a dawn quite like discovering your shoes have turned into frozen sculptures of regret. Leggings and shirts were often made of deerskin or elk hide, softened and smoked to resist moisture. Fringes weren't only decorative, they wickered water away, preventing it from soaking the core garment. Picture rain rolling down tassels instead of seeping into your thigh. Function disguised as fashion, long before runways tried the same trick. And when fur was sewn inside, those leggings became walking blankets, insulating every stride. Gloves and mittens also entered the picture. Simple hide mitts lined with fur trapped heat better than fingered gloves. Yes, dexterity was sacrificed, but survival isn't about texting speed. It's about keeping fingers attached. Children sometimes wore mittens tied together with sinew so they wouldn't lose them, a trick still haunting modern parents who wonder why their kids keep dangling mittens from strings like tiny flags of defeat. And headgear, absolutely vital. Heat escapes through the scalp faster than through most other areas, so hoods, caps, or fur-lined head wraps kept warmth where it mattered. Think of it as the ancient reminder that if your head's cold, the rest of you follows. A fox fur cap or a buffalo fur hood wasn't just stylish, it was life insurance. At night, pulled down low, it blurred the line between clothing and bedding. You didn't need to separate them, the robe, the hood, the leggings, all merged into one seamless cocoon. Now the brilliance of this system was adaptability. Inside the tipi, where the fire kept things warmer, you could strip down to lighter layers to avoid sweating. Step outside for water or wood, and you wrapped yourself instantly in heavier outerwear. It was constant adjustment, not static dressing. You might think of it as living inside your own portable thermostat, always clicking up or down with the tug of a tie or the drape of a robe. Here's where humour sneaks in. People inevitably made mistakes. Someone fell asleep too close to the fire, layered too heavily, and woke drenched in sweat. Cue frantic peeling of hides, muttered curses, and the smell of damp fur filling the tipi. Others underdressed, bragging they could handle the cold, only to crawl shivering into the communal robe pile an hour later. Human pride versus winter. It's never been a fair fight. Even small accessories mattered. Belts and sashes trapped heat, preventing cold drafts from sneaking in. Scarves of fur or woven fibre wrapped around necks, doubling as makeshift pillows at night. Jewellery? Sometimes functional too. Bone toggles or fasteners designed to cinch garments tighter against wind. Every piece carried dual purposes, and nothing was wasted. If you think your scarf is multi-purpose, because you also use it as a headband, imagine a sash that held your leggings in place, doubled as firewood strap, and kept your torso warm all at once. And let's not forget the science hidden inside these traditions. Modern thermodynamics tells us that heat transfer works by conduction, convection, and radiation. Native clothing addressed all three without anyone using fancy terms. Thick hides slowed conduction, layers trapped air, breaking convection, fur surfaces reflected warmth back, limiting radiation loss. It was physics in practice, explained not with equations but with centuries of trial, error, and adaptation. Translation: no PhD, but everyone survived the semester of winter. Clothing also held symbolic weight. Certain furs were considered prestigious or protective. Wearing wolf hide might suggest bravery. Fox fur hinted at cunning. These meanings didn't disappear at bedtime. Children were wrapped in specific hides, thought to guard them spiritually, not just physically. Survival wasn't only about temperature. It was about identity, belonging, and continuity with ancestors. Each stitch in a hide carried memory, and each garment doubled as a quiet prayer against the cold. Picture yourself now, lying under robes but still wearing your leggings, moccasins stuffed with grasses, and a hood pulled low. Your breath rises in faint clouds, and your clothes hug your body, trapping every bit of warmth you produce. The fire's glow touches the edges of your hood, and you feel safe, not in the modern, locked door sense, but in the primal sense of knowing your body heat is sealed inside, guarded like treasure. And yet the comedy of daily life persisted. Someone's leggings ripped in the middle of the night, producing a draft that sent them wriggling miserably. Someone else's moccasin stuffing had frozen stiff, and they woke feeling like they'd been wearing wooden clogs. And yes, there were constant debates. Did you wear that shirt too close to the fire? Now it smells like smoke forever. Practical concerns, family arguments, and endless adjustments. Because clothing was never done. It was alive, changing with each task, each hour, each shift in the wind. You stretch beneath the robe, yawning, and your hand brushes against your cheek. The skin feels oddly slick, almost waxy. That's because in these winters, people didn't just rely on hides and clothing, they armoured their very skin. To live in the kind of cold where your breath turned to daggers, you needed more than layers, you needed shields directly on your body. And here enters a category of survival tools that sounds bizarre at first. Grease, ash, and clay, smeared onto faces and limbs, turning skin into a kind of living barrier against the cold. Forget your fancy lotions. This was skincare with an agenda. Animal fat was the most common defense. Rendered from buffalo, deer, or bear, it was rubbed into exposed skin, leaving a thin, oily sheen. It didn't just moisturize, it sealed in warmth and kept the cold wind from stripping away natural oils. Imagine Vaseline, but with the added bonus of smelling faintly like your dinner. Grease also helped prevent frostbite. A thin layer meant that biting air hit fat before it, hit flesh, buying you just enough insulation to keep blood flowing. Babies and children were sometimes slathered more generously, their cheeks shiny, their noses glistening under firelight. If you think diaper cream is odd, picture a winter nursery that smells like roasted venison and keeps little noses from freezing solid. Ash was another trick. A smear of fine wood ash mixed with fat made a paste that dulled shine and added grit. Ash absorbed sweat, keeping skin dry, and acted almost like primitive sunscreen by reducing glare from snow. Yes, imagine trudging across a sunlit prairie, snow-blinding white, and realizing your ancestors invented SPF ash long before Coppertone. Plus, ash discouraged insects in warmer seasons, so it was a year-round multitasker. Who knew fireplace leftovers were also skincare essentials? Clay joined the lineup too. When available, certain clays were smeared as masks over hands and faces. Clay hardened into a crust that slowed windburn and insulated skin. It looked ridiculous, like you'd wandered into a spa treatment halfway through a snowstorm, but it worked. In fact, archaeologists believe such practices may have even been tied to ceremonial meanings, doubling as spiritual paint. Survival and ritual braided together, proving once again that looking slightly absurd might just save your life. And here's where humour sneaks in. Picture an entire family, shining and smudged, preparing for bed. Everyone greasy, everyone smelling like smoked fat, cheeks streaked with ash. A stranger walking in might think they'd stumbled onto the set of a very dedicated barbecue festival. But inside the teepee, this shine meant protection. You were less likely to wake with cracked skin, less likely to feel the sting of icy drafts across your face. Comfort sometimes looks ridiculous, and nobody cared as long as it worked. Skin shields extended beyond smearing, though. Hair was also treated carefully. Long braids insulated the head, keeping strands from whipping into icy tangles. Fat combed through hair acted like conditioner, but also kept warmth sealed. If you think your leave-in product is revolutionary, remember that someone centuries ago was massaging bear grease into their scalp for both survival and shine. Practical and surprisingly fashionable. Glossy braids reflecting firelight must have looked both impressive and intimidating. Now, consider lips. In winter, they crack painfully, bleed, and make every smile feel like punishment. Ancient solutions. Grease again, or a mix of animal marrow rubbed gently across the mouth. Children might complain, but the alternative was frostbitten lips that stuck together at the worst times. Practicality wins again, even if the taste wasn't winning any culinary awards. Another subtle defence was smoke itself. Living in a tipi meant constant exposure to wood smoke, which carried resins and oils into skin and clothing. This smoky coating acted as a preservative, protecting hides and people alike. It wasn't intentional skincare, but it worked. Smoky skin resisted rot, bugs, and dryness. Yes, it made you smell like a walking campfire, but in an environment where wolves prowled and frost crept, smelling smoky was the least of your worries. Besides, maybe even the wolves appreciated the aroma. And let's not forget circulation. Clothing and grease were external defences, but the body's own heat had to be encouraged. People learned to move even inside the teepee, stretching fingers, flexing toes, rubbing hands briskly. It wasn't aerobic exercise, but it was enough to keep blood flowing. Children were sometimes told to make fire in your fingers by wriggling them furiously, a little bedtime game that doubled as frostbite prevention. Simple, silly, effective. But there's a symbolic layer too. Grease and ash weren't just practical, they carried meaning. The act of smearing fat across a child's cheeks wasn't only protection, it was parental care embodied. You didn't just say stay warm, you physically pressed warmth into their skin. Ash streaks weren't merely sunscreen, they could mark belonging, connection to ancestors, or readiness for ceremony. Cold blurred the line between survival and ritual, and every smear of fat carried both practical and spiritual weight. Now, imagine yourself in this scene. You sit cross-legged by the fire while someone rubs warm grease across your cheekbones. The smell rises faintly, smoky and animal-rich, but you feel the sting of cold fade as the sheen settles on your skin. A sibling leans close, their own face streaked with ash, looking both comical and fierce. Around you the teepee glows golden, shadows flickering across shiny foreheads and matte streaks. It's absurd, it's intimate, and it's survival. Of course, mishaps happened. Someone used too much grease, and their bedding became slick, sliding off in the night. Someone else forgot to smear ash, walked outside at dawn, and returned with a face red as a cooked lobster. and children naturally found ways to turn the practice into play, smearing grease in silly patterns, making beards or animal faces until parents scolded them into seriousness. Survival came first, but humour was never far behind. And perhaps here lies the most human truth. When the cold threatened to strip away dignity, people responded not only with ingenuity but with laughter. A greasy nose, a clay mask, a shiny forehead, they became jokes shared around the fire. And in those jokes, warmth grew stronger. Because survival wasn't only about insulating the body, it was about insulating the spirit too. You lie still, the hides heavy across your chest, and hear the soft sound of breathing around you. It's not just your own, it's the steady rhythm of many lungs, many chests rising and falling in unison. In the tipi, no one slept alone in winter unless they were courting frostbite. The family was its own. Furnace and group sleeping was less about affection than mathematics. Pile enough warm bodies together and suddenly the night becomes survivable. You could say they reinvented the electric blanket long before electricity. Only instead of wiring, you had relatives, and instead of a switch, you had elbows in your ribs. The arrangement wasn't random. Families thought carefully about where each person slept. Children and elders, those who lost heat fastest, were placed closest to the fire or tucked in the very centre of the pile. Stronger adults lined the outside edges, creating a wall of warmth against drafts. Husbands and wives, siblings, grandparents, cousins, all arranged like puzzle pieces in a human diagram of survival. Your spot wasn't chosen for comfort, it was chosen to maximise heat retention. Who snores the loudest wasn't a factor, though you can imagine the debates when one uncle's snore rattled the entire cone like a buffalo trapped inside. Picture the scene. A mother curls herself around an infant, the baby wrapped in layers of fur, pressed against her heartbeat. The father lies close, shielding them both from the draft that snakes in near the hide door. Nearby, grandparents are given prime spots, warm and cushioned, because wisdom doesn't thrive in frostbite. Youngsters, rowdy during the day, now tangle like a litter of wolf pups, arms and legs sprawled in awkward heaps but keeping each other alive with sheer body heat. Nobody slept in perfect comfort, but everyone slept together, and that closeness was its own protection. Group sleeping had another bonus. It discouraged predators. Coyotes or wolves might sniff near the edge of camp, but a teepee full of humans smelled and sounded formidable. The heat, the breathing, the occasional cough or snore, all of it reminded the night creatures that inside was no easy meal, and if danger did appear, waking the group was instant. One person stirred, the whole family stirred, a ripple effect of survival. There's safety in numbers and there's warmth too. Now, let's talk about the mechanics of heat. Your body radiates warmth constantly, even in sleep. Alone in the cold, that heat disperses into the air, wasted. But in a shared pile, heat bounces from one body to another, trapped under hides and robes. Children in particular benefited. Tucked between adults, they absorbed the warmth of two people at once. Think of it as the ancient double charger. One outlet, two benefits, and everybody wakes with warm fingers still intact. And yes, it was intimate. Privacy as you imagine it now didn't exist. Whole families, sometimes extended relatives, shared one shelter, one bed, one warmth. Modern sensibilities might flinch, but for them, survival outweighed embarrassment. If your cousin's foot ended up on your back, that was life. If your grandmother rolled against you, snoring softly, you didn't complain. You thanked her for being an extra radiator. The teepee was both house and bedroom, and intimacy was not optional. It was expected. Of course, human quirks made the arrangement imperfect. Blanket hogging existed. Someone always managed to tug more buffalo robe their way, leaving another shivering and muttering threats under their breath. Children kicked in their sleep, delivering sharp little blows to anyone nearby. And then there was the eternal battle of snorers versus non-snorers. Imagine lying in a fragile warmth cocoon while your neighbour's nostrils roar like a thunderstorm. Complaining solved nothing. Everyone endured, because separating meant cold, and cold meant danger. You learned patience quickly in a communal bed. Humour found its way into these moments. Parents teased children for talking in their sleep. Siblings whispered jokes until a stern shush cut them off. Someone farted under the robes and laughter rippled even as noses wrinkled. Yes, even survival has comic relief. And in fact, laughter itself created warmth, not just in hearts, but in the very act of shaking bodies and shared breath. Cozy is a relative term, and sometimes it came with giggles in the dark. Now, let's not romanticize too much. Group sleeping wasn't always pleasant. People sweated under too many layers, creating dampness that chilled when someone rolled away. Space was limited. Stretching out luxuriously was impossible. Illness spread easily. A cough on one side of the tipi soon became a chorus. Yet the system endured because despite its flaws, it worked. Nobody froze alone when everybody froze a little less together. And here's a fascinating quirk. The arrangement shifted with the seasons. In summer, when heat was abundant, families spread apart, sometimes even sleeping outside under stars. But in winter, they compressed, drawing in tight circles. The shape of their sleep mirrored the cycles of the world. Expansion when generous, contraction when harsh. Winter was the season of closeness, forced, but also cherished. Imagine falling asleep pressed against your entire family, hearing not just the fire, but the chorus of their breaths. Knowing you all faced the same storm together. It was survival, but it was also community in its purest form. Think too about the psychological comfort. To a child, waking in the night to a howling wind, the presence of warm bodies on either side offered reassurance. To an elder, drifting into sleep surrounded by descendants, the cold was less frightening. Togetherness wasn't only about warmth, it was about safety, belonging, the assurance that you weren't facing the night alone. A tipi wasn't just a structure, it was a womb of shared humanity. And here's where the story folds back to you. Imagine yourself there, pressed shoulder to shoulder with family wrapped in shared hides. You feel the heat of others seep into your bones, your breath mingling with theirs, the fire's glow painting everyone's faces in amber hues. Outside, the wind claws at the hides, desperate to pry you apart, but inside your warmth grows stronger by the minute. Each body feeds the next, each breath strengthens the whole. You're not an individual tonight, you're part of a living, breathing furnace, stronger together than alone. And maybe, when you think about it, that's the quiet genius of this practice. Survival wasn't just about tools or tricks, it was about trust. Trust that the person beside you would share their warmth, that the robe would be tugged back if stolen, that laughter would soothe discomfort, that presence itself could fend off despair. In the endless cold, people became each other's fire. The fire flickers lower, glowing embers pulsing like sleepy eyes, and within that golden circle of warmth, your gaze drifts to the figures curled closest to the flames. It isn't the strongest hunters or the loudest storytellers lying in those prime spots. No, those spaces belong to the most fragile, the children, the elders, the ones whose bodies surrendered heat fastest. In winter camps, survival was a group project, but priority was always given to those least able to fend off the cold on their own. Caring for the vulnerable wasn't an afterthought. It was a survival law written in every sleeping arrangement, every robe placement, every shift in the fire's glow. Imagine a grandmother, her hair silver, her joints stiff, eased carefully onto a soft mound of hides nearest the pit. The fire warms her bones while younger relatives line up at her side, shielding her from drafts. She murmurs a blessing for them, her voice rasping but steady. Around her, children giggle and wriggle, too full of energy even at bedtime. They're hushed quickly, tucked under robes, their tiny bodies pressed between parents for maximum warmth. It looks chaotic, perhaps, but it's precision disguised as affection. The weakest in the circle always received the most heat. Babies in particular required delicate care. Wrapped tightly in layers of fur, sometimes tucked into cradle boards lined with moss or feathers, they were carried directly to the warmest zones. Mothers kept them close, often skin to skin beneath robes, their body heat the most reliable heater of all. Picture a tiny face peeking from a cocoon of fur, pink cheeks glistening with a faint smear of protective grease. Tiny fists tucked in while the mother's heartbeat thrummed steady beside the fire. The baby slept warm, not because of technology, but because the community rearranged itself nightly to make sure of it. Children old enough to tumble in the snow all day but still vulnerable at night were layered in extra hides, their feet wrapped in fur or stuffed with dry grasses before sleep. Parents would check them repeatedly, sliding a hand over a small back or cheek, testing for dangerous chill. If the fire shifted, or the draft crept in, the children were moved closer instantly. Imagine the constant vigilance. Parents dozing but never sinking too, deep, ears attuned not only to the howl of the wind outside but to the faint stirring of a child inside. Elders, too, were precious. Their stories carried the weight of memory, their advice steered the camp's choices. A frozen elder wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was the loss of wisdom, the collapse of a living archive. So their warmth was everyone's business. Younger relatives surrendered prime bedding spots, pulled extra robes across wrinkled shoulders, fed them hot broth before sleep. It wasn't sentimentality, it was logic. A community that let its elders freeze would lose not only love but also knowledge of which plants healed, which paths led to shelter, which decisions spared lives. Survival required memory, and memory required elders alive to speak it. The acts of care extended beyond warmth. Frail hands were massaged near the fire, stiff feet wrapped and rubbed to restore circulation. Stew was offered before bed, warmth radiating from within as much as without. Children were soothed with lullabies, their spirits kept calm, because fear itself could worsen the cold. Panic wasted energy, burned calories, drained reserves. Comforting words weren't luxuries, they were tools, as vital as hides or wood. In a winter tipi, love was practical. Of course, reality brought its humour too. Children wriggled from their careful cocoons. Robes kicked off with the force of a tiny rebellion, leaving parents scrambling to rewrap them. Grandfathers muttered that they didn't need the special spot, and then promptly hogged the fire with exaggerated sighs of contentment. Siblings bickered over who got to sleep closer to the flames, shoving quietly until a parent's stern glance silenced the struggle. Caring for the vulnerable didn't erase human quirks, it just added warmth to the comedy of survival. And yet, despite the chaos, the system worked. No one froze alone. The tipi wasn't simply shelter, it was a network of responsibilities. The strong gave up comfort so the fragile could live. The young carried fuel so the elders could rest. Parents lost sleep so children could gain it. That nightly redistribution of warmth was survival disguised as family life, and it kept the community alive through winters that would have crushed individuals. Now, imagine yourself there. You've been placed on the outer edge, you're back to the draft because you're young and hardy. You grumble, pulling the robe tighter, but then you glance inward. You see the baby sleeping peacefully in the mother's arms, the grandmother sighing softly by the fire, the siblings tangled in a heap of fur, and suddenly, the draft feels less cruel. You realize your discomfort is the blanket that lets someone else breathe easy. And you drift into sleep with the strange satisfaction of being a wall, a barrier, a protector. The logic of this arrangement extended outside the tipi too. Communities built themselves on the principle that the fragile were never abandoned. Hunters risked blizzards to bring back food for children. Scouts searched tirelessly for safe campsites, knowing an elder's brittle bones couldn't handle endless relocation. Warmth wasn't just about fire. It was about choices made to keep the vulnerable alive at every level. Think of the symbolism, a tipi glowing on a frozen plain, and inside it, the fire warms the fragile first. The circle of care radiates outward, each layer of the family taking its place. That circle was both literal and spiritual, a promise renewed nightly. When the storm howled outside, the answer inside was always the same. No one is left to freeze. Some nights, when storms raged too fierce for comfort, families stayed awake in shifts, watching over the elders and children. They whispered stories, hummed songs, and stroked tiny faces, not only keeping them warm but keeping them calm. Survival wasn't silence, it was sound. Quiet voices weaving through the night, creating a cocoon of reassurance as tangible as the hides and fire. So when you think of how native families endured winters in their tipis, remember this image. Warmth wasn't just fire in the pit or robes on the floor. It was people rearranging themselves nightly, giving up comfort, tending the fragile holding watch. It was love converted into heat, care into insulation, family into a furnace that no storm could extinguish. The fire has sunk into a bed of glowing coals. The tipi hushed except for the occasional pop of sap and the steady chorus of breathing. But warmth didn't only come from hides, robes, or human bodies. Sometimes it was summoned from stones, those silent companions of earth that, once kissed by flame, could glow with heat long after wood had burned away. Hot stones were more than rocks. They were ancient batteries, storing the fire's gift and releasing it back into the night. Picture a group gathering smooth river stones before dusk, choosing them carefully. Not all stones were equal. Some cracked violently when heated, bursting like miniature grenades. Others, dense and solid, held heat without complaint. The knowledge of which to choose was passed down like a recipe. Never pick porous stones, avoid those near water in winter, seek the dense dark ones that carry warmth like secrets. Once selected, they were nestled in the fire until they glowed faintly red, or until the heat radiated from them in waves strong enough to make you step back. When night fell, these stones were lifted gingerly with sticks or wrapped in hides to avoid burns. They were carried to the bedding, tucked under robes, slipped between layers of grass mats, or placed near feet. The effect was miraculous. Sudden warmth blooming where once the ground had felt like a frozen grave. Children curled against them, toes stretched gratefully, sighs rising like prayers. For a few hours those stones transformed the bedding into a heated mattress. Primitive, yes, but effective. Enough that you'd forget you were lying on a floor of pine boughs and earth. There was an art to it, of course. Stones too hot burned hides, leaving singed patches and foul smells. Too cold, and they barely made a difference. The sweet spot was somewhere in between. Hot enough to radiate through fur, but not so hot you woke with blisters on your calves. Parents often tested them first, pressing carefully, before sliding them near the little ones. Imagine a mother murmuring, "Not this one, too fierce," setting it aside to cool, then placing another with the gentleness of tucking in a lullaby. But stones weren't just heaters. Combined with water, they became steam. Some families heated stones, then dropped them into shallow pits filled with water, creating bursts of vapour that moistened the air. In the dry bite of winter, when skin cracked and lips split, that steam brought relief. It warmed lungs, eased coughs, softened the cold's cruelty. You might call it a sauna, though it wasn't indulgence. It was medicine, a humidifier conjured from fire and stone. And here's where things got even more ingenious. Stones were portable. When a family needed to travel in winter, they sometimes carried hot stones in containers lined with hide or ash, preserving heat for hours. Those glowing cores lit the path, warmed hands, and jump-started the next fire at camp. Imagine trudging across snow, clutching a bundle that radiated faint warmth like a secret sun in your pack. In a world without thermoses or batteries, a stone could be your lifeline between one fire and the next. Now, let's talk humour. Mistakes happened. A stone wrapped poorly might slip free, landing directly against someone's leg in the night. Cue yelps, frantic shoving, and muffled laughter as the victim flailed under heavy robes. Children sometimes sneaked stones into their bedding without permission, only to scorch a hole in a robe and endure lectures about respecting the fire. And yes, at least one unlucky sleeper probably rolled over onto a cooling stone, mistaking it for a sibling's knee, and grumbled insults into the darkness. Survival wasn't always elegant. It was often slapstick with consequences. But when it worked, oh, how it worked. Imagine your feet pressed against a stone still radiating warmth, hours after the fire dwindled. The glow lingers, not in light but in sensation, seeping through layers of hide into your bones. You shift, and the stone shifts with you, a silent partner in your battle against frost. Sleep comes easier when the cold doesn't gnaw at your toes, and dreams stretch longer, unbroken by shivers. Stones also carried symbolic weight. They were pieces of the earth, steady and eternal, lending their strength to fragile human bodies. Some traditions even considered them sacred, keepers of fire's memory, companions in ceremony. To hold a warm stone was to hold a fragment of both earth and flame, a union of elements, harnessed for survival. Children learned early to respect them, to never mock their power, because a good stone could mean the difference between warmth and frostbite. And water. Let's not forget water. Heated stones dropped into frozen vessels could melt ice for drinking or cooking. No fumbling with brittle chunks, no waiting endlessly for snow to boil. A single glowing rock hissed into the pot, and suddenly the impossible cold gave way to life-giving liquid. The hiss, the cloud of steam, the scent of minerals, those were the sounds of survival. And when steam rolled through the tipi, moistening hides, it also helped seal seams, keeping the shelter stronger against the wind. One task bled into another, each solution solving more than one problem. Imagine lying there now, your head nestled on furs, a heated stone tucked beneath your bedding. It radiates a steady pulse, a slow heartbeat of earth fire beneath your ribs. Your breath fogs gently in the cool air, but your body is wrapped in a cocoon of warmth from above and below. Around you, others sigh, adjusting their robes, murmuring in dreams. You're not just surviving. You're comforted, lulled into rest by a piece of the riverbed transformed into a guardian of the night. The next morning, the stones cool to dull grey, ready to be reheated. Nothing wasted, nothing lost. Day after day, night after night, they repeat the cycle, patient and loyal. Firewood disappears, robes wear thin, but stones endure. They wait, they absorb, they release. Ancient companions who never tire of their role. In their silence lies continuity, the quiet assurance that even in the harshest winter, some things will always hold their heat. And maybe, when you reach for the thermostat or plug in an electric blanket tonight, you'll think of those glowing stones, hissing in pots of snow, glowing in piles of hides, warming small feet and elders' hands alike. Survival was never about one trick. It was layers upon layers of ingenuity. And in the heart of that ingenuity lay something deceptively simple. A rock made hot, placed gently where it mattered most, turning a frozen night into one more chance to wake alive. The tipi hums with quiet, the fire's glow softened into embers, and yet you know this warmth is not permanent. Winters were never static. The land itself shifted with the seasons, forcing families to move their shelters like pieces on a chessboard. Tipis were not stone castles. They were portable, collapsible, ready to rise and fall with the rhythm of survival. To sleep warmly through the cold meant not only mastering fire and hides, but also knowing when to pack up and follow the sun, when to lift the poles and trek toward new hunting grounds, when to seek valleys that cradled you instead of ridges that betrayed you to the wind. Nomad life was itself a blanket, wrapping families in adaptability. Imagine dawn breaking after a particularly brutal night. The fire is little more than smoke, the robes heavy with frost at their edges. Adults stir, children whimper, elders groan at stiff bones. And someone says the words everyone knows, "We move today." Not because they want to, moving meant labour, dismantling, loading, trudging, but because the snow had drifted too high, the woodpile too low, or the herds had shifted beyond reach. Staying meant freezing, moving meant hope. And so, the tipi transformed from bedroom to bundle. The genius of the tipi lay in this portability. Poles lashed together, hides folded, ropes coiled. Within an hour, a home was stripped down to its bones and ready for travel. Horses later carried the loads on travois, but even before horses, dogs hauled smaller frames across snow. Children toted lighter bundles, learning early that survival wasn't free, it rode on your back. Picture a procession across frozen plains, poles dragging furrows behind dogs, people bent beneath hides, smoke still trailing faintly from the ground where their fire had been. The land was not forgiving, so they did not linger in any place that turned hostile. And this mobility wasn't just survival, it was strategy. By moving with the seasons, families stayed near food and fuel. In summer, they camped by rivers rich with fish and berries. In fall, near hunting grounds where bison gathered. In winter, they sought sheltered valleys, groves of trees, cliffs that shielded from wind. Each move was a recalibration, a constant search for the next warm night. Their map wasn't paper, it was memory. Stories told by elders of valleys where snow lay shallow, where wood was plentiful, where the wind seemed to pause for breath. Sleeping warm, then, wasn't just about what happened inside the tipi. It was about choosing where the tipi stood. You could stack hides, pile furs, tend your fire all you wanted, but if you camped on open prairie when the north wind roared unchecked, you were doomed. Survival meant humility before geography. The people who lived in these shelters knew the land like you know the corners of your own bedroom. Every dip, every stand of trees, every shift in the river was recorded not on paper, but in memory, repeated in stories until children could recite them in their sleep. Now, humour sneaks in here too. Moving camp in winter was not glamorous. Children complained, dogs tangled their harnesses, poles snagged on roots. Someone always dropped a bundle in the snow, cursed loudly, and had to repack with frozen fingers. Fires refused to light in the wind, so meals were late and tempers short. You might imagine noble silence, but picture instead a father muttering that his poles were longer than his patience, while his wife reminded him that survival was more important than pride. Even in migration, comedy warmed the spirit, and yet the design of the tipi made it possible. Other shelters, earth lodges, longhouses, were sturdy but static. The tipi breathed with the seasons. Its very mobility was a sharp weapon against the cold, a way to chase warmth instead of waiting for warmth to come. Think of it as the original smart home, not controlled by apps but by legs, instinct and memory. Travelling with warmth in mind also meant carrying it. Coals were scooped from the fire, wrapped in ash or bark, carried to the next camp to spark new flames. Imagine trudging through snow, guarding a faintly glowing ember like it was a royal treasure. One slip, one lost coal, and the next night became harder. But if you kept it alive, you lit a new fire in minutes, continuity stretching from camp to camp like a necklace of glowing beads. That ember was more than convenience, it was lineage, fire passed from yesterday into tomorrow, a living thread tying one night's warmth to the next. Sleeping in new camps required fresh adjustments. Ground cleared, snow tamped, boughs laid, hides spread. Each night was a rehearsal of the same ritual. Build the nest, stoke the fire, arrange the family, test the smoke flaps. Some nights succeeded easily, others were struggles, but the repetition itself became rhythm. Children grew up inside that rhythm, learning that survival was not a drama of last-minute panic, but a steady chain of practiced habits. Each move taught them again, warmth is not permanent, warmth is earned daily. And here's where the story folds inward. Imagine yourself on the move, your robe pulled tight, your breath crystallizing as you drag poles through the snow. Behind you, the old campsite fades, smoke trails dissolving into sky. Ahead, a sheltered valley beckons. By evening, the tipi rises again, poles leaning like friends, hides stretched taut. The fire pit is dug, stones ringed, wood stacked. And by nightfall, you're lying once more beneath buffalo robes, the fire's glow familiar, the wind muted. You've carried your warmth with you, rebuilt it from pieces, renewed it like breath. Nomad adaptability wasn't glamorous, but it was brilliant. It made warmth not a fixed possession, but a skill. No matter where the land shifted, families shifted too, carrying their homes on their backs, their heat in their arms, their memory in their minds. In a world that tried constantly to freeze them solid, they answered with motion, with flexibility, with the quiet defiance of never staying still long enough to be claimed by the cold. So when you picture native people surviving in Tipis through winter, don't imagine them trapped and static. Imagine them fluid, migratory, lifting warmth from one valley to the next, carrying fire in their hands and homes on their shoulders. Warmth wasn't luck, it was motion, memory and muscle, all braided together into a way of life. The night deepens and the fire glows low, but the tipi feels alive in another way, not just through heat, but through voices. Warmth wasn't always measured in degrees, sometimes it was measured in songs, stories, and the invisible shield of belief. Spiritual warmth mattered as much as buffalo hides, because winter on the plains wasn't only a test of the body, it was a test of spirit. When the wind clawed at the hides and the snow piled high, people turned to ritual, to prayers, to stories that wove courage and comfort into the air. Survival required more than fuel, it required faith. Imagine lying under the heavy robe, your eyes half closed, while an elder speaks softly into the flicker of the fire. The words are stories of ancestors who endured worse winters, of spirits that guided hunters through storms, of animals who taught humans how to live with the cold. Each tale is both entertainment and insulation, a way of reminding everyone that they are not alone, not the first, not without guidance. The fire's heat warms your skin, but the story warms something deeper, the will to see morning. Songs, too, carried heat. Soft chants rose into the smoke hole, mingling with stars. A drumbeat, even quiet, mimicked the heartbeat of the earth, steady and reassuring. The vibrations travelled through hides and bodies, reminding everyone that rhythm persists even when frost bites hard. Children lulled by these songs didn't only fall asleep faster, they slept calmer, steadier, less afraid. Fear consumes warmth faster than cold, and belief quenched fear. Rituals sometimes involved the fire itself. People offered bits of food, fat or herbs to the flames, feeding not just themselves but the spirits they believed dwelled within the crackle. The act was symbolic but also practical. Sage or cedar burned in the pit scented the air, warding off insects in warmer seasons and creating a fragrance that felt cleansing in winter. To breathe smoke mixed with herbs was to breathe a reminder that even in hardship, beauty lingered. And there's humour here too. Not every ceremony was solemn. Someone might sing off key and giggles erupted. A child repeated a prayer with muddled words, transforming it into an accidental joke. An elder scolded gently, shaking their head, while hiding a smile. Survival wasn't maintained by severity alone. It was lightened by laughter, by the absurdity of life continuing even in the fiercest cold. If you think your family holiday dinners are chaotic, imagine rituals interrupted by toddlers crawling under buffalo robes determined to make spirits laugh as well as people. Beliefs about warmth extended beyond physical tricks. Some traditions taught that cold itself was alive, a spirit that could be negotiated with, appeased, or even tricked. Families might speak respectfully of the wind, addressing it as a visitor rather than an enemy. Others wore painted symbols on their robes, believing the markings carried protective power. In this way, sleep was guarded not only by furs and stones, but by invisible shields of faith. Dreams were valued too. Sleep wasn't just rest, it was a bridge to guidance. In winter, when nights stretched endless, dreams carried significance. An elder might wake and recount a vision. A bison herd moving north, a warning of storms, a blessing of survival. Such dreams shaped choices, but they also gave meaning to suffering. If you believed the cold night carried a message, you endured it differently than if you thought it was meaningless pain. Meaning itself became a blanket draped invisibly across every sleeper. Now, picture the sensory world of this spiritual warmth. The tipi dim, smoke curling upward, the faint sound of a drum tapped gently, voices humming low. The air scented with sage, the fire flickering as herbs crackle. Around you, faces glow in shadow, eyes half shut, bodies swaying faintly with the rhythm. Outside, the wind still howls, snow still lashes, but inside the tipi, you feel a cocoon not just of hides and heat, but of story, song and shared belief. The spirit of the fire mingles with the spirit of the people, and suddenly the cold feels less like an enemy, and more like a challenge you've been taught how to face. Of course, there were slip-ups. Someone forgot a line of the story, invented a new one, and was teased mercilessly the next day. Children fidgeted through ceremonies, kicking each other under the robes. And yes, skeptics existed. The practical hunter who rolled his eyes at spirit talk, while still dutifully placing his offering in the flames just in case. But even the doubters participated, because ritual wasn't only about belief, it was about unity. Togetherness itself radiated warmth. So when you think of how native families survived freezing nights in their teepees, don't stop at fire pits and buffalo robes. Picture also the intangible fire, the stories told, the songs hummed, the dreams shared. Warmth was not only physical, it was emotional, spiritual, communal. It was laughter in the dark, prayers whispered into smoke, children soothed by the idea that ancestors watched from the stars. Imagine yourself there now, the robe heavy on your shoulders, the fire a dull glow, and voices drifting around you in a language of survival older than winter itself. You feel the warmth of the body beside you, yes, but also the warmth of belonging, of being carried not just by hides and stones, but by faith. The tipi breathes with song, and you breathe with it. That is warmth too, the kind you can't measure with temperature, the kind that doesn't vanish when the fire burns low. It lingers in the heart, long after the embers fade, long after the storm has passed. And maybe, tonight, as you drift, you'll find that same warmth wrapping you, unseen but steady, reminding you that even in the coldest nights, we are never truly alone. The night stretches endlessly, and in the tipi's cocoon of hides and embers, you feel the rhythm of survival slowing. Every method, the fire pit glowing, the buffalo robes draped, the smoke flaps adjusted, the grease shining on skin, the stones tucked under bedding, the layers of clothing, the shared warmth of bodies, has carried the family to this point. But now, as the storm outside softens and the snow hushes into silence, what remains is the final ritual of winter survival, resting, truly resting, letting the body and mind surrender to sleep. The wind down of the night was as important as the preparation, for sleep itself was a healer, a secret tool against the cold. Lying there, you feel how carefully the tipi holds warmth. The fire no longer roars, it sighs, its coals banked under ash to last until morning. Around you, breathing steadies, slower now, each exhale rising like a ghost to the smoke hole above. Your skin prickles faintly where fur brushes it, and beneath your head, pine boughs release their sharp scent. Every sense softens, the fires glow dimmer, the shadows longer, the air quieter. This was the moment when families allowed themselves to loosen the tension that had carried them all day. They had gathered fuel, tended fire, adjusted robes, soothed children, checked elders, and now, finally they exhaled. The psychology of survival mattered here. Fear tightens, exhausts, drains, but calm, even in a fragile shelter, replenishes. Families told quiet jokes as they drifted, letting laughter melt into snores. A child mumbled nonsense in sleep, a parent chuckled softly, an elder whispered blessings. These were not luxuries, they were deliberate choices. Just as you shield yourself with hides, you shield your spirit with comfort. They knew that a heart softened by calm would endure longer than one clenched in dread. Imagine lying close to the fire pit, your face tinged with its glow. The embers pulse slowly like a heartbeat in the earth. Beside you, the steady warmth of another body presses against your shoulder, and further beyond, layers of robes rise and fall with every breath of those still awake. The tipi's walls sigh in the breeze, but inside the sound is muffled, a soft hush that lulls rather than alarms. You feel suspended between the living fire and the living warmth of family, balanced perfectly, safe enough to drift. Outside, the prairie is brutal, icy, merciless, stretching endlessly beneath stars that glitter cold and sharp. But the tipi denies that cruelty. It wraps the family in its cone of hide and wood, creating a pocket of defiance. Even when temperatures plummet far below freezing, inside the tipi the balance of tricks, fires, robes, stones, grease, closeness, creates a bubble where life can continue. And within that bubble, sleep becomes possible. Not restless shivers, not panic, but real sleep, with dreams that remind you you're more than just a survivor. You're part of a living rhythm older than any storm. Humour didn't vanish, even here. Someone rolled over and tugged half the robe off a sibling who muttered and yanked it back. A snore erupted so loud it startled a child awake, who was then soothed with sleepy pats and laughter. A dog, curled near the fire, twitched its paws in a dream of chasing rabbits, kicking sparks into the air until someone nudged it with a weary foot. Even in exhaustion, life bubbled, refusing to be frozen into silence. Warmth wasn't sterile. It was alive, messy, noisy, full of quirks that reminded everyone they were still human. And yet gradually the noises dulled. The arguments, the laughter, the crackles all softened. Breath by breath, the tipi surrendered to quiet. Sleep pooled across the room like a second blanket, tucking everyone in. The fire dimmed to embers, the wind outside grew muffled, and stillness spread. That stillness was not emptiness. It was strength. To fall asleep in such conditions was itself an act of victory, a nightly triumph. Every dawn proved the tricks had worked, the methods had held, the warmth had endured. Now imagine yourself drifting in that same rhythm. Your robe presses heavy, your body cushioned on pine boughs, your toes warmed by a stone that still radiates faint heat. Grease on your cheeks glistens faintly in firelight, blocking the sting of the draught. You're cocooned, shielded by the warmth of others, by the fire's glow, by the invisible comfort of belief and story. Outside, snow drifts higher, but inside you breathe easily, shoulders slack, eyes sliding shut. You've joined the centuries of sleepers who survived this same night, in this same way, their warmth passing down in memory to you. And here, in the last moments before true sleep, the tipi feels like more than shelter. It feels like a womb, a circle that gathers earth, fire, family, spirit, and time itself into one breathing whole. In this womb, you're not simply enduring winter, you're part of a tradition that has turned survival into something graceful, even beautiful. So, let your breath slow. Inhale the smoky sweet air, exhale the weight of the day. Feel the robe's heaviness, the press of warmth from your side, the fire's faint sigh. Know that the storm cannot reach you here, not tonight. You are safe, you are wrapped. You are part of a circle that has carried life through winters beyond counting. Sleep drapes itself across you gently. The tipi darkens, the fire hums softer, and the rhythm of breathing fills your ears. You surrender, not with fear but with calm, knowing the tricks of survival have worked, knowing warmth has been made, knowing morning will come. And as you slip away into dreams, the cold world outside falls away, leaving only this circle of warmth, timeless and unbroken.